Beautiful. All right. Well, welcome again, everyone, to the Dcyf Integrated Strategic and Racial Equity Plan webinar. Today's focus is on the priority strategy around creating a high-quality integrated birth-to-8 system. And my name is Yvette Jasper. I'm with the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. I use she, her pronouns, and feel very blessed to be occupying the Puyallup tribal lands here in Tacoma. And I will be helping host the webinar with you all today, along with our awesome crew with the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, Day Shugren, Latoya Holmesware, and Jordan Rogers. And we also have, for folks who are participating live, Chelsea from our community engagement team, and she'll be muting you or unmuting you as you want to raise your hand and make a comment during our Q&A and comment section. And then we'll be introducing, and thank you again, Betty, for being here to support us with the webinar logistics. So if you have, again, if you have needs, please put that in the chat, or you can direct message one of our panel, or Betty, directly. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. And I first want to acknowledge that we have Talina Ives from our Office of Tribal Relations, and she's so graciously offered to open up our time together with an acknowledgement of our lands. So Talina, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you, Yvette. I also want to call your attention to the chat box where you can choose all panelists and attendees and share with us today where you are joining us from. To all of you honorable people, my name is Talina Ives, and I am a guest joining you from the Port Madison Indian Reservation. And I say guest because I am a member of the Port Gamble-Sklallam tribe, who makes my home on the Suquamish tribal territory, who are the people that are the first to this land and still remain here strong, with over 1,200 in their membership, that operate a strong government that has been in existence since time immemorial. The Suquamish tribe is home to many great leaders and the sacred site to the Agate Passage, the site of Old Man House Village, the winter home of Chief Seattle. The tribe is signatory to the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. I'm thankful to be able to carry on this tradition of land acknowledgement. That's a teaching that's given to me and my people that give us a connection to the land and to the people, acknowledging us as guests in the territory or the stewards of this land. So really thankful to see this practice being used today. And in the chat box, I have included some resources for you to explore in case you are interested in learning whose territory and whose Indigenous land you are joining us from. Land acknowledgement is a traditional custom dating back centuries for many tribes in this area and for many nations. For non-Indigenous communities, land acknowledgement is a powerful way of being able to show respect and honoring the Indigenous peoples of the land of which we work and live. Acknowledgement is a simple way of resisting the erasure of Indigenous histories and working towards honoring and inviting the truth. Thank you for allowing me some time on the agenda to get us started in a good way.
Thank you so much, Talina. So I'm actually going to start again by welcoming the rest of our panelists. Today we have a beautiful cross-agency team, credible leaders who are going to be sharing a little bit about where we are with the integrated strategic and racial equity plan. And so they'll be each introducing themselves when they come on and speak about the plan, but I want to acknowledge Kelly Bohannon, Barb Geiger, Judy King, Nicole Rose, and Vicki Ibarro, who will be sharing the priority strategies. And I'll actually hand it off to Vicki to kind of provide an overview and some context around the strategic plan.
Thanks, Yvette. And thanks to you all who've joined us today. It's great to be with you, and it looks like we have a wonderful group of participants today. I'm looking forward to a robust discussion and listening to thoughts and perspectives from across the state. I'm thrilled that we have representation from participants across the state. So as Yvette said, we're here to talk specifically about the creation of high quality integrated birth to 8 system priority. But I want to just remind folks of where we are with the strategic plan and now our integrated strategic and racial equity plan. It's been about a year since DCYF first posted our first draft of what we thought then was going to be our first ever 5-year strategic plan. It was January of 2020 that we posted a plan that had 5 agency priorities with the goal of finalizing that strategic plan by mid-year last year. We were intending for a robust external engagement phase. We had planned many webinars with the Secretary around the state, webinars and visits with the Secretary around the state. And I think you can still see most of those plans on the agency website. And then COVID hit, and we had to cancel many of those planned engagements. Some of them were kept. The Secretary did visit some of those meetings, but because of COVID, the topic was COVID rather than the strategic plan. But we did have time to have the plan posted for a while. We posted a survey that gave us some feedback. In addition, we continued to talk about the strategic plan and provide updates at many of our standing advisory group meetings, so that we continued to get feedback from both inside and outside the agency, although not as robust as we had planned initially. We started processing, given COVID, much of the agency leadership attention was on that for many months. So around August, September, we started reprocessing, where do we want to go with this? In reviewing much of the initial feedback we had from the initial draft plan, it was clear that we needed to integrate our plans for an agency-wide racial equity plan with the strategic plan. We had initially envisioned these as 2 separate processes because we're on separate timelines, with the racial equity plan planned to take a bit longer because of the need for more robust community engagement. And it became clear, based both on where we were in the fall and on the feedback we've received to date, that we really needed to integrate these 2 plans. So that decision was made this past fall. And inside the agency, we have worked to review the agency priorities related to the current situation. The landscape of the world is a bit different now than it was a year ago. Certainly the COVID pandemic and the associated recession have indicated that our opportunities might be a bit different than they were. What we found is that the priority areas, for the most part, stuck. They are still good. We now have a new first priority related to equity, eliminating racial disproportionalities and advancing racial equity. The other 5 priority areas, 3 of those related to intention, or we think of those sort of as programmatic specific service areas, safely reducing the number of children in out-of-home care, creating I'm on a laptop where I can't read that third one rather, but creating successful transitions for youth who are in our care, transitions to adulthood for youth who are in our care, creating high quality integrated birth to 8 system. Those have stood the test of time from last year, broad areas of programmatic priorities that we still believe are our priority. Now, for those of you in the early learning space who've watched this particular priority, you may note that when we first put out the draft, it was a high quality birth to 5 system, and we have moved to a high quality birth to 8 system, and I'll let our early learning experts on the call to speak more to that, but this also was based on substantial external and internal input. The last 2 priority areas of the plan have to do with our agency capacity, and they they speak to improving the quality and intention of our internal practice of the work our staff do, and then also improving quality and availability of provider services. We will not be covering in depth the capacity priorities today. We do have planned webinars around all three of the intention priorities. This is our second one, and we look forward to hearing your input. Next slide, please. So this is just a bit more about our timelines, again, going back to earlier this year when we reviewed where we were. We're currently in this January to March phase where we're needing to put up the integrated strategic and racial equity plan draft on our website. We are behind in that, and I apologize. If you go to our website today, you will still find the draft that was put up last January. But we are closer every day. And then we do plan this month for two strategic priority webinars. This one related to creating the high quality birth to aid system. And then on February 3rd, related to creating successful transitions for young people. Last month, we had our first strategic priority webinar related to safely reducing children in out-of-home care. And I appreciate that many of you were also on that call and provided us terrific feedback. Our goal is to make good use of this feedback as well as what we're getting from our existing advisory groups and other places, and to have a final plan by early April of 2021 posted on the website. Of course, any good strategic plan is a living document and is evaluated regularly and updated regularly. So we expect that in the coming years, even though this is a 5-year plan, that there will be opportunity for annual updates and ongoing listening and adjustment as needed, especially as the environment changes. So with that, I'll turn it back over to my colleagues, and thanks once again for the opportunity to be with you today.
Oh, thank you, Vicki. So in case you weren't able to join the webinar in December, in each of these webinars, we're just going to highlight and ground us in the new first priority strategy around equity. And once that draft of the plan is posted, you'll notice that we included some context to support the new first priority and the strategic plan that addresses the root causes or the sources of where racial disproportionalities and disparities come from. Because, our team finds that, people have very many different ideas of like, why do we have racial and ethnic disparities and disproportionalities? And so we really want to ground DCYF's commitment to racial equity and social justice, why disparities exist and how we got here. We know that this disparities aren't a result of individual choices, it's really by design. So our role and goal as an agency is to proactively redesign or design our systems where we center our most marginalized community members, and in particular our Black, Indigenous people of color, so that our systems are truly serving all of our community members. And so you'll notice in our priority or in our strategic plan, we touch into the root cause of systemic racism. So. And then just to, give you a brief overview of where we are with the focused areas of work. So the actions that we'll be taking as an agency to eliminate racial disproportionalities and advance racial equity and social justice. We have some focused areas of work around the work that we need to do as an organization to become anti-racist and pro-liberation. We are thinking about how to, as we redesign, implement liberatory and healing-centered program design across DCYF and ensure that our assessments and programs are equitable. So we know that there are specific actions that we need to take now to eliminate bias in assessments and programs. And so that is that third priority strategy. But most of what we need to do really needs to be co-created with communities who are most impacted So that's where the second priority strategy comes in, and that is a skill that we need to build capacity around to do that work intentionally. And so we're investing some resource and time and support for our staff, and investing in community to really work with us. And that's, you'll notice the questions and the discussion that we have for you today are really centered around that. How do we best partner and engage with community? And you'll notice as you engage with our office, one of the mottos that we consistently share is that there's nothing about us without us that's for us. The slogan from the disability rights and youth activists, and we really want to live into that motto. And so that's the focus of the equity strategy. Great. So now I will hand it off to our colleagues in who will be describing the birth to 8 strategies. So go ahead, Kelly.
Thanks so much, Yvette. Can you hear me okay? Great. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you to share this with all of our colleagues at DCYF in this webinar today. I'm Kelly Bohannon, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am really proud to be part of this panel. I get to represent the wonderful work of the Early Learning Programs Division in the agency, and I'm joined by a few other colleagues that I'll introduce as I pass it off to them in just a minute, but I'm gonna get us kicked off, and I wanna get us kicked off by saying that before we move in to an overview of DCYF's birth to 8 integrated system strategies, we wanted to take a moment to just really acknowledge that while DCYF plays a really central and important role in early learning in Washington State, that we're part of a much larger system of cross-sector organizations, partners, programs, and services that, come together to serve our state's youngest children and families. And over the last couple of years, DCYF has had this really fortunate opportunity through the Birth to 5 Preschool Development Grant to work with partners and families across the state to complete an early learning needs assessment. So to really be able to get a sense for what are the needs in our early childhood or early learning landscape? What are the needs of families across different parts of sectors and the different parts of being a whole family? What are the needs of children that we're seeing in our state? What does our state landscape look like in terms of who we're serving? And certainly, who are the providers? Who are the adults in children's lives? And what do we need to know about the strengths and the needs and the areas that we need to improve there? So we've worked really hard to pull that information together. And as a result of doing that needs assessment, we also had the chance to create sort of a special plan that we're calling the Statewide Early Learning Coordination Plan. And many of you on this call, I'm sure in this webinar, have been a part of this statewide work if you've joined this webinar or at least know about it. Currently, that statewide coordination plan is out for public comment in its final outreach stage by the end of this month. That will come to a close. And before we go into the DCYF strategy today, we just really wanted to make sure that it was clear what the relationship of that statewide plan is to our DCYF strategic plan, and to say that while they're different and distinct plans, they're very much related and complementary of each other, which is what we're trying to show in this visual. So you can see to the left a picture of our DCYF strategic plan, and then to the right, you see the statewide coordination plan. And then there's a colored framework next to it, which kind of represents the 5 areas of that cross-sector plan. And then there's some examples of key partners. And the reason why we put those key partners around the side is that, like DCYF, all of those partners bring something unique to our work in supporting the youngest children and families in our state. All of us are going to bring our strategic work to the table. And this coordination plan, it's really meant to be aspirational. It's meant to be an aspirational vision to bring us together in the landscape of early learning partners, if that makes sense, to work on behalf of this sort of age range in our state. So that plan, the coordination plan, it includes high-level kinds of goals and strategies to support all children and families, but what's really unique about this plan is that there's a very intense focus on eliminating long-standing inequities and really focusing on how we can turn a system to anti-racist practices in all that we do, which is a really important mark of that specific work, and also another way that it really aligns with where we're taking this work in DCYF. So I think we just wanted to make sure that before we go into the specifics of what DCYF's role will be in the larger landscape, we just wanted to touch on that work that we're doing, because again, we know lots of you have been a part of that work, and we want to make sure that it's clear that they're different, but they're very much complementary, and that we'll be really using that feedback from the statewide plan that we get through January that includes all partners to really feed the DCYF work as well, as we move into the specifics of that. And what you'll also see if you've looked at that coordination plan, which is available on our website, we're happy to share that information later if you want to look specifically there if you haven't seen it yet, that you're going to see a lot of parallels. There isn't going to be anything in this Birth to 8 strategy that you don't see inside that statewide coordination plan in some form. They're very much related in that way, as other partners will experience with that statewide plan. So with that, I think that takes us to the next slide and really the focus of our part of today's webinar, which is to share with you the draft agency priority that we have named, create a high quality integrated birth to 8 system. And I'm really honored to be joined by 3 amazing colleagues that share in this work with me and with our staff and with all of you in our communities and all of DCYF. And we're going to be sharing parts of this strategy with you because we all have a piece of it. And so Judy King from our Family Supports Division, Nicole Rose, that's representing Eligibility and Provider Supports, and Barb Geiger, representing today's Child Welfare Programs, will all be taking on a piece. And before I hand this off to Judy to get us started with that, we wanted to really acknowledge that while this priority strategy holds a central focus on early learning for the agency, that it's important to say that parts of our early learning work are really alive across many of the strategies that you're going to hear about in these webinars. In fact, the first webinar is an example of that, where we really talk about a lot of prevention related work where early learning comes to life. And as you all know, in DCYF, we work, from prenatal all the way to, age 26. And what that means is that early learning just exists in families. And we really see that and acknowledge that. And it's just a part of that continued effort we are making to build an integrated approach to our work in DCYF. So with that, Judy, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started with the strategy.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Judy King, and I'm the director of the Family Support Program Division. So get to work with amazing staff who are, again, working across a lot of our integrated strategies, but with a real focus on increasing access to infant and toddler supports and services. And we do most of this work in partnership with communities and with many of the rest of you who are in other parts of our system. As you know, infants and toddlers are that time of really robust brain development and really an important time for building relationships with caregivers. And so there are several bodies of work that we focus on that you're probably familiar with. So I'd like to just spend a few minutes talking about those. So with our birth to infant and toddler supports and services, we have a focus on our intensive, more longer term home visiting services offered in communities through our home visiting services account. There's been some great opportunities at DCYF because, as Kelly mentioned, this is a really important strategy to strengthen and support families and prevent out-of-home placements, which is another one of our key strategies for the agency. Home visiting is included in our Family First Prevention and Service Plan, which is going to offer, we think, opportunities to expand the reach of this effective service as we go forward. We're continuing to support the development of what we call light touch home visiting, an entry point for parents at the time of birth to get connected to what they need. Some of you may be familiar with the work that Pierce County is doing with a model called Family Connects. We're excited to learn about this and how it connects to some of our overall linkage and referral work we're doing with Help Me Grow, so that all families can get the support they need. the right kind of support that matches their dreams and goals as a parent. And this early on, right after the baby is born, is a great time because our state is also implementing the new paid family and medical leave benefit. So we all know that parenting can be really hard out of the gate, and especially during this time of isolation that many families are experiencing during the pandemic. Let's get families connected. We have some great ongoing work within our early support for infants and toddlers program, ESIT, where we support families with children, infants and toddlers with developmental delays or disabilities. Starting this fall, the program is fully administered at DCYF, and we'll continue to be really working hard to support those high quality services and our commitment to equity. We know those early supports can make a tremendous difference in the life trajectory of children and their families with, again, the supports that are really individualized to meet the unique strengths of the families. We're going to round out sort of our focus on infants and toddlers now and talk a little bit as we move into other services that span out to age 8. And I'm going to ask my colleague Barb Geiger to say a few words about some of the ways that this expansion for infants and toddlers is linking us and connecting us with child welfare. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's so great to have you here. I'm Barb Geiger, and I'm with Child Welfare Programs, and I have had under the DCYF umbrella amazing opportunities to work as within the child welfare system with the early learning system and really focus on how those programs and those systems can integrate to better support our children and families across the state. One example of this is over the past year, we've had 3 child welfare early learning navigators who reach out. They work with families who have been identified for involvement in the child welfare system, whose children are still in their homes with their families, to help them access needed early learning programs and supports and wraparound services. Programs just getting off the ground. We're seeing some great early results in helping to connect these families with these community-based resources that they can continue to be involved with after our child welfare involvement ends. The population of potential children who could be involved in this program over the course of a year, it's about 25,000 children who touch the child welfare system, who are in home with their parents. So the impact on these families and these vulnerable kids is really huge. So it's exciting, and it continues to reinforce and support our commitment to providing high quality early learning services to our most vulnerable children and families, and as an agency to continue to integrate how we provide our services as we move forward. We also have opportunities through child welfare to help connect families who have been involved in the child welfare system with high quality childcare. And to talk a little bit more about childcare and what's going on in that system, I want to pass it along to Nicole Rose.
Great. Thanks, Barb. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nicole Rose. I'm the Director of Eligibility and Provider Supports at DCYF. And in that division, there are a lot of things related to quality, and it also has our child care subsidy work. One of the things I wanted to acknowledge as we talk about child care is that one of our colleagues is not here with us today, and that's Luba Bezbaradnikova, who is our Assistant Secretary for licensing, and she and her team are really instrumental as we think about expanding access to high quality care and partnering in this work. So also great to be here with you all this afternoon. I'm sure it's not surprising, and if you have kids who were in childcare prior to the pandemic, or were even if you had kids, school-age kids, suddenly there were times when folks needed access to care, and care maybe wasn't necessarily available or available at the times that were needed. And so really the pandemic has highlighted the need to really expand access to high quality affordable care that actually meets family needs. And one of the things that we're learning through this is that what we know about supply and demand is much different than it used to be in the past. Families are making different choices, but we still need to have a variety of care available for those families who choose to use it. And so the pandemic also highlighted a system that was a little bit broken before and needed some stabilization. And so there's been a lot of work and effort throughout the past 10 months
to really look at how we stabilize that industry and really how we think about how we're supporting the recovery of the childcare business sector, because folks are really finding how important and integral that is to the economic recovery of the state. And so, while we do this, we want to make sure that we're being attentive to provider needs, that we're still being attentive to high quality, so still thinking about our quality rating and improvement system, early achievers, but also being flexible where we need to be as we think about all of the things that our providers are experiencing right now. As you think about the childcare sector, we also have an early learning workforce that we need to have some flexibility with right now. And that workforce, as we think about it, really goes beyond childcare. It is crossing all of the work that my colleagues are sharing today. And so one of the things that we have really been working on doing is thinking about how we're looking at standards and competencies across our workforce, our early learning workforce, and trying to be flexible in thinking about how we can take into consideration experience as we're looking at the qualifications and professional development that folks need. The other thing I would highlight here is that our early learning workforce in childcare is predominantly women and women of color. And so that just gives us an extra focus to put that racial equity lens on the work that we are doing. As I talked about having some unified strategies to develop that workforce, some of the things that really cross all of these bullets here today are thinking about trauma and resiliency, and I think that has been highlighted even more during this pandemic and with some of the things that are happening in our nation, the importance of our providers having access to information to help them navigate that. And so I'm really grateful to work with all of the colleagues here on making sure we're supporting that continuum of workforce and making sure that we've got high quality childcare available for those families who need it as we move through this system. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelly, who's going to talk a little bit more about another piece of integration that's happening across our system and others.
Thanks so much, Nicole. Yeah, I get to round this out and finish this with all of you. So I have the opportunity to talk about our strategy around creating a responsive and inclusive system of integrated pre-K. And those of you that I've worked with, I've seen many of you popping into the webinar today. I've worked with many of you on this for a number of years. And what's exciting about this strategy is that it is grounded in this opportunity to build on the promise and strong foundation of such high quality preschool that our state has already built. What we've brought to the table with early achievers as a framework and how we continue to learn from and adapt that as a quality foundation. In addition to what we know programs like Head Start and ECAP have brought to that space for children and families and for providers, what developmental preschools have brought and beyond. We know that there are a number of high quality preschool offerings in the state, and our goal is really to work with partners across the landscape to develop a system of pre-K that really enables us to serve children and families in a way that is much more inclusive, equitable, and really overall responds to the strengths and the needs that they have that they're bringing to the doors of our providers. So the vision for this strategy is essentially to create a system that enables multiple and varied streams of funding and regulations and different provider types. So from ECAP, again, to Head Start, special education, Part B preschool, what we now have in our state we call transitional kindergarten, local government contributions, different grants, and of course, copay options and systems like Working Connections childcare, really trying to create an integrated system that enables our providers across settings to be able to provide high quality, inclusive, and integrated preschool options. Right now in many communities, most communities, we can't serve children by integrating those programs, and it creates a lot of havoc for families. It's not best for children, especially children with special needs and complex needs and families who need us most. There's a lot of transition, unnecessary transition that we know is not in their best interest. what I'll say is that the specific planning work around this, again, it builds on a strong history of what we have in our state. And we will continue forth with a lot of the quality things we have in place now and quality programs and measures. As we do the planning work and get it underway, in part, we want to be clear that this is also in response to Governor Inslee's January 2020 directive to DCYF and the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction to develop some recommendations for an actual integrated pre-K model that addresses what I've just talked about. And so specifically just to be a little bit more clear about some of the aims and goals we have for this effort. As I've said already, we want to make sure this really builds on the quality we already have and what we're learning as we're implementing these programs. We want to continue to ensure that children with the highest needs that we're most worried about, those families are prioritized for enrollment in across communities, especially in communities where we know there are grave deserts. We really want to make sure that we're improving access to inclusive environments for children with disabilities and children with complex needs. I've kind of mentioned that in the pandemic, we've seen this become a terrible issue. I mean, beyond what it ever was before, where schools are shut down and children with IEPs in particular are not getting the services that they need and deserve. And so we want to make sure that children, with IEPs and children who we know are impacted by trauma, even more so now, that we are creating environments that are responsive to them across different kinds of provider types and settings. We want to remove barriers to participation in our program. So for example, school districts have a really hard time participating in a lot of high quality programs because the funding and regulations make it very difficult for them to participate as it does for other provider types. So we want to continue to focus on that through this effort. We want to expand access. We think that by getting more streamlined and leveraging the best of what we have, and by our state agencies removing barriers to using these funds and implementing these programs, that we can actually increase access. So that is a big piece of this. And then with the arrival of transitional kindergarten as an option for serving preschool aged children, we want to bring that into the fold of our high quality preschool continuum. And it's not quite there right now. So this effort also helps us really hone in on that. So there's much more, but that gives you a taste of that. And I think that wraps us up in going over the strategy. And I'm going to turn it over to Day to take us into the reflection element of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly and Barb, Nicole and Judy, for providing so much information, and Yvette and Vicki for setting us up in terms of how we're going to continue to engage and integrate both the racial equity strategic plan and in particular how we're focused on birth through 8 right now. And I actually just laughed because Betty and I just simultaneously put in the chat, please feel free to start asking your questions in the Q&A. Just always appreciate like-minded thinking. So we've just provided so much information to you about across the spectrum in terms of what we're doing and what we're looking at to support our littles, our tinies, through the age 8, everything from childcare to staffing. So asking for you now, are there any clarifying questions that you have before we move forward? And I see one question coming in anonymously to the Q&A, so I'm just going to read this out loud. Will we be taking into consideration and value the race, ethnicity of some of our providers and not require some or all of the educational qualifications? There is such value with tribal providers and others that should have much more value placed on it than some of the education requirements. So I'm reading this as how much will lived experience be taken into consideration and not just educational experience. And I'm actually looking at any of you and all of you to respond to that, but I know Nicole in particular had talked about staffing, so I'm going to tag you first, Nicole.
Yep, that is me. Thank you. And thank you for that question. And this is something that came up as the licensing rules were being worked on. It was a huge topic in what we call negotiated rulemaking. And then as we went to implement the staff qualification from that work. And so really at this point in time, someone who is working in childcare and has had experience, and I want to say it's 7 years, and I need to go back and look at this, actually can meet the qualifications just by having that experience in childcare. So what I'm going to do as these other questions come in is find the link to the information that says how you can meet the staff qualifications with experience right now, and I will put that in the chat. And then the other thing that really is happening is there was a real focus during last legislative session, I believe, around looking at community-based training as well. And so when we think about staff qualifications, there are a lot of different components to that. Some are pre-service training requirements, in service, and then there were some pieces related to education. And there is a group that is looking at how do we take what we know about community-based training and put that towards meeting the staff qualifications that are required in licensing.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I also saw that Vicki also responded to a question in the chat about when the goals would be available for review, and we'll get those up on the website as soon as we can. Teacher Test has a question in the chat asking, Seattle Public Schools is opening in the spring to kindergarten and first grade. Will all the preschools that have been remote learning open up for an in-person learning too? And I'm not sure which one of you to direct that to. Kind of looking at Kelly. Kelly, you're muted. There we go.
Yeah, I don't know that we have a straight answer for that, because it really does so much depend community to community what that's going to look like. So, you know, in ECAP, for example, which is really the perspective that I could be most accurate around, given that it sits in my division at DCYF, you know, we're tracking that and watching where, you know, trends are happening across the state with openings, but there isn't a straightforward answer, unfortunately, to that question. But Nicole may have additional to add around childcare. Nicole, not to put you on the spot.
Oh, yeah, no worries. So I think one of the things to note that I actually didn't say when we were talking, which is kind of important, is that childcare has remained open throughout this entire pandemic and has been allowed to remain open and continue to provide care while following the Department of Health guidelines around child care and youth development. And so, you know, depending, I think Kelly is really right that it's going to really depend. I think each district is making their own decisions, but if they are operating child care or preschool, they can remain open following the guidelines.
Thank you both for that. We have another question as well from Casey. How can we support communities and providers who do not have or cannot afford internet access?
Thank you, Casey, for the question. I'll start with that. I know it impacts all of our programs across the agency and definitely across this birth to 8 time period. So I would say we're working really hard to try to find ways that funds can be used in a flexible way to help support providers having access to the kinds of tools that they need, and for the home-based services, which I talked about earlier, both ESID and home visiting, also ensuring that programs can provide those tools, whether they're tablets or internet access for families, so they can continue virtual services. So that's a snapshot of one part of our system, and colleagues can add for other places that that's happening.
Well, I would just add that we work directly, DCYF works directly with our contractors in ECAP. And so again, I'm only speaking to this one program, but you know, we've worked with each one of those contractors as they've come into those barriers and, you know, done everything we could to make sure that, especially in those remote settings, when we're doing what we call non-traditional remote services, which is a high percentage of our programming is happening that way because all of ECAP is open. But a lot of it's happening remotely. We've just worked with them with the resources that we have in ECAP to ensure that connectivity. But outside of ECAP, I can't really speak any more to that. So I'll look to Nicole to see if she has any elements to add around childcare.
Yeah, so this has been a big topic in childcare, in particular in thinking about our providers who are providing school age care, because part of what that means is that they are providing care to children during the day, and they may also be assisting them in accessing whatever remote learning is happening for their K-12 experience. And so some of the ways that DCYF has tried to support that are through some of the grants that have gone out to childcare. Vicki has made a note in here about broadband expansion being prominent in the governor's budget. There also was an item in the governor's budget for childcare providers to have dollars to get access to internet as well. It's also something that we are in conversation with our partners at OSPI about, because they did have some dollars that were available specifically around internet, and so more to come on that.
Great, thank you all for that. I also too, I know that Nicole, you highlighted what Vicki had added in the chat, but also say that Betty added that the state has free internet sites supported by the governor around the state. So again, this is definitely taking multiple partners to make this happen. As we know that some schools have been able to provide some internet services, and we continue to do our best to provide services for the families. And thank you, Nicole, for adding that link into the chat. I'll make sure to also track that. I know we have a couple more questions coming in, but we're just going to pause for a moment as we've moved away from some of these clarifying questions. And Yvette's going to lead us in a poll, and then we'll come back to some of these questions.
Awesome. So we are doing just a brief pulse check on the priority strategy. I know Vicki said that the overarching priorities have sustained through COVID, but we would love to hear from you, and I'll launch the poll. But our question is, how well do you think, let me actually change the slide. How well do you think this priority strategy, so creating a high quality integrated birth to 8 system, will support the children, youth, and families in your communities? And you can also think about like the focus areas of work that we shared. And I'll go ahead and launch the poll and give you all a couple minutes to respond. Okay, so we're right at about the 1 minute mark. We have about 65% of the folks who've responded. So as folks, a little bit more responses are trickling in, for, I don't think this will show in the webinar recording. So for the webinar recording, I think, we have about 6, I'll just say from the highest to the lowest scores. So we have about 60% of folks are saying that the strategy is going to be very supportive for their communities, about 27% somewhat supportive, 10% extremely supportive, and 2% not very supportive. So thank you all for engaging in that. And just if you would love to kind of share some of your comments, your reasons for why you responded the way you did in the chat, we'd love to hear from you. And the other opportunity you can have is if you see the function in your participant panel, you can also raise your hand if you'd like to share, but I'll hand it off back to Day to continue.
Thanks, Yvette. So we've got actually this next question. If you want to advance the next slide, Yvette, that'd be great. How do you envision DCYF partnering across programs and with community to achieve these goals? I think some of the questions that are coming through the Q&A begin to address this in some subtle ways. I'm going to start with the first question that came in. How will child care providers access and navigate grant applications and all support programs being implemented in their own language?
So I will address that one. Through the last 2 rounds of grants that we have done, there have been resources and information available in English, Spanish, and Somali. And then we have worked really closely with Child Care Aware to work closely with providers who needed support in going through the grant application process. And what we have found in our Child Care Aware coaches is that they are very much reflective of the providers that they are serving. And so we feel like that has been a good strategy, but would love to hear feedback if there is something else that folks would like to see. Spanish and Somali are typically the languages we translate in. And then when you think about staff qualifications and some of the trainings, you do see them available in those languages as well.
Thanks, Nicole. David also asked questions. This is more about the internal process, not so much the external outward, as each of these are great outward actions or things we hope we do better at, and yet the internal work feels missing, particularly how decisions are made, how leadership defines its role, how the organization is structured, all of which carry the racism and inequity of our thinking and culture, and maybe this shows up elsewhere. What do you think?
Well, I think any of us on the entire panel probably have a response and some thinking to this, but I'll share what it brings up for me. I think that we are an agency in progress. I think that we are a work in progress when it comes to this, and I can tell you as a member of our leadership team that the commitment is real and true and deep. And what I get to experience and see is, you know, the continued support that we provide each other to do this work individually, to become, you know, for me personally, to acknowledge my own white privilege in the role that I get to play in this agency, to do the individual work that I need to do. And I feel really supported by my colleagues in that. At the same time, you know, I see our leadership team taking steps to build that capacity to really lead for this work in a way that's actionable every day. And we're a work in progress. But I'm really proud to be part of it. And I think that we're starting to really see it reflected in action in our work.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Anyone else like to respond to that question? Okay, we'll move on. Someone is also asking about recruitment in child care communities, specifically seeking BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, as providers. The communities really want to see their staff, their race and ethnicity reflected in their child care. Can we talk about recruitment and support for BIPOC child care providers?
Yes, and Day, if I could, can I go back to the previous question that we just had as well?
Sure.
I wanted to echo, I think, a lot of what Kelly was saying, and I think appreciate the conversations that we're able to have as a team, this team who's on this call, and others who are not here as well, as we try and navigate this together. And I am often reminded, you know, as we go through this, that we are still an agency that's maybe in, I don't know if we've made it to toddlerhood yet, even though we're a couple of years old in developmental stages. And so just thinking about sort of those developmental milestones really as as an agency who has come together with a lot of different things. And, you know, I think we're trying some things on for size and trying to figure out the best way to navigate and move forward. And again, just want to appreciate my colleagues and appreciate the questions that are being asked of us as well. I think that helps to helps us continue our thinking related to this work. So as far as childcare providers, one of the things I want to acknowledge is that recruitment of providers into this field is something that we haven't had a lot of focus on. And so I think it's an area we would like to explore and would welcome any feedback and thoughts you all have about the best way to do some of that work and who really are the trusted messengers that we should be working with as we do that. So it's an area I think that had been focused on many years ago, and now it's something we probably need to take a look at and also think about what's the demand going to be and how do we make sure that the supply of childcare providers, as you're noting, is reflective of the community that they're caring for.
Thanks, Nicole. Judy, this next question is for you, but I see you responded written. I'm not sure if you still want me to read it out from Aliza around the acknowledgement for trauma-informed and healing-centered services. But I do have another question for you, Judy. Let me just grab it real quick here.
Oh, I'm just seeing it now.
Okay. I'll read it out loud for folks who didn't see it. ESIT providers, SICC committees, ECDAW, and WeCare presented very specific edits to the strategic plan. How have they been included, and will we be hearing from an ESIT staff member on today's panel?
Hi, Mimi. Thank you very much for your question. Again, this is Judy, and I get the honor of working with the ESIT team in the Family Support Division. So we don't have a specific ESIT staff member today on the panel, trying to keep it high level, but the ESIT strategy falling in our infant and toddler expansion conversation is really strong. And the answer is yes. All the input that came in from the really strong early intervention organizations, advocacy organizations, and advisory groups was taken in. I think we're working still on some wordsmithing, trying to make sure that things are tailored and clear for communities, and those have been brought in. So I think that's, yeah, and I'm encourage Mimi again as well to reach out to ESIT staff members or myself if you have other questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Judy. Actually, so these next questions that are coming up, Yvette, I think relate to our next broad question. If we want to advance the slide, we're doing okay on time. How should community-driven approaches that center Black, Indigenous, people of color experiences look? Part of that came up in the hiring question, as well as in the question about how we are examining ourselves internally and addressing bias in our work. Hold on, I just lost the question. I think it was in the chat here. Is there a timeline? And I see that Vicki, you addressed this too in the chat, but is there a timeline for updating the limited race and ethnicity choices available in our early learning systems? Seems like it's an easy, important step as we try to recruit racially diverse field staff. And I just want to, I'll read Vicki's response out loud as well. Julie, you'll be interested to know that OIAA, so our Office of Innovation, Alignment, and Accountability, is releasing our first agency-wide equity data report that includes recommendations for agency-wide racial data collection and reporting.
Thanks, Dee. I'll just add,
yeah.
If I can, I'll just add, and I know Julia will be interested in this. We do have some parts of the agency some programs that collect data in a fine-grained enough manner that we can do the kind of reporting we want, and that simply doesn't happen in other areas of the agency. So this report inventoried all of those practices, sets a standard agency-wide for default racial ethnic data reporting that is based on former Children's Administration, WAS or DAC, Washington State Racial Disproportionality Advisory Committee recommendations from about a decade ago. So we're taking best practices for data collection and reporting from across the agency and setting the standard for the entire agency. We'll be working through our data governance plan over the next year to get that implemented. Thanks.
Thank you, Vicki. So the question that we've posed for you all to provide again and to continue to build on the discussion we've had already is how should community-driven approaches that center BIPOC experiences look? And again, we recognizing that hiring and recruiting BIPOC staff and child care centers is one way to do that. Also collecting accurate data, which is something that clearly that we are working on. What are other ways that we can center and approach BIPOC experiences to better support the birth through 8 system? This is where we really need your voice. Thank you, Mindy. Yes, involving key leaders in the BIPOC and BIPOC communities is key. So my question for you, Mindy, is who are those key BIPOC leaders? Oftentimes, I think with any large agency, we end up partnering with the same people in the same agencies. This really is hopefully part of an ongoing push to look at who has not historically been reached out to, or who might be an emerging leader that we have yet to be introduced to or talk more with. And so this is not just for Mindy, but for anybody too. If you have specific supports or people that you're thinking of as we do this work, as we're thinking about this, maybe it's you, maybe it's somebody that you work with, it'd be really valuable for us to be able to connect and engage in conversations so that we can, again, improve the work that we're doing. Absolutely. So again, Tess, seeing your comment in there about scheduling, we know that the workday isn't limited for everybody, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. So we want to be sure to do our best to be available in non-traditional work hours. And actually, that's the same for some of our staff as well. We have many staff who are in 24-hour facilities and people who work on the weekends. And so how are we engaging in these conversations, again, after traditional hours, even on the weekends? And some of this work is being done there, but not enough. So agreeing with you there that we want to make sure that we have a variety of time available. And I'm seeing some comments here in the Q&A supports, and I'm just going to continue to read out loud some of these responses to our question. We want to work with each county and their advisory groups to address cultural competency and service to people. DCYF WACS now asks programs to track and report expulsion of children from licensed child care programs. Oh, this is a question, sorry. Let me rephrase that. This is a question. Since DCYF WACS now asks programs to track and report expulsion of children from licensed child care programs, has this practice decreased expulsion, and is there a way to share statistics and trends from this reporting? So we're looking at expulsion of children from licensed child care programs. And I'm going to look to see which one of you unmutes first to help me answer this question.
So this is Nicole. What I'm going to say is I would like to get back to Angie on the answer to this question, because I am not sure if we have yet reports or data on this. And I think that Travis is, I think I saw Travis on, so or maybe Anne as well. So if we do have data on this now, if you guys could chime in, that would be great.
So Travis or Anne, you'll need to raise your hand. Okay, so that Chelsea can unmute you.
Hi, this is Anne. Can you guys hear me? Can you repeat the question, Nicole?
Oh, so the question was, it's about our expulsion reporting. And my question was, I'm not sure if we've pulled data on that or any reports on that yet in order to analyze trends.
This is
there's
Travis. Yeah, we're tracking it. We have not pulled any data on it. We haven't looked at it yet, but we are tracking it.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Anne and Travis, for contributing to that. We have somebody who's sharing that we don't always build time or resources into the processes to allow for and support gathering meaningful input and feedback from communities and holding space in our processes for communities to review the initiatives, reports, and work groups they're a part of. So I think that speaks also to not just the issue of actual time during the day that these processes are offered, but also just the expansion of time that sometimes we needed, that oftentimes we're pushed by a deadline or for some perceived deadline to get things done rather quickly, rather than doing it deeply and slowly and meaningful. Some other ideas are coming in the chat. I want to make sure that I'm getting an eye on all these questions that are coming in. With the community-driven plan model and implementing equitable practices in birth through 8, will, quote, whole child approaches be used in the learning environment, sourcing staff and services? We're asking about whole child approaches in the community-driven plan model.
So I'll just take a try at this. I mean, I'm not quite sure if community-driven plan speaks to the statewide coordination plan, if that's what they're maybe speaking to. But I would say regardless of whether they're speaking to that plan or to our work that we do at DCYF, you know, I think that all in all, when we look across programs and services, we are aiming to focus on a whole child approach whenever possible, particularly in this age category, this age range where the adults matter so much to the health and well-being of the child, as we all know, whether it be the providers that are with them, the families that care and love for them, or other community partners who are interfacing with those children. So I would just say that yes, through our strategies, that is our aim, to continue to build whole child into everything that we can in the agency, but for sure in the statewide coordination plan. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, there is a link I know Yvette put in the chat box, and it's also available on our website for people to access if you want to go that route. But I would say take a look at that, because what you will see is a lot of whole child element really come to life in what we're really trying to do through those strategies. So I would say, yes, that is the plan. And I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that, but I would say, I don't know that we can achieve the outcomes that DCYF has without it.
The only thing that I would add is the whole child also embedded in the family and community, because we're trying to, again, think of our work more closely tied to communities, really knowing families and knowing their preferences. So as we're thinking about that child, we are thinking about how they exist within their family and within the community where they reside. So yeah, I think that's an important one, and one I think we need to continue to build our skill and muscle around. So thanks for the suggestion.
Thank you all for the responses there. Another question around essentially who's at the table. The different groups that met across the state seem to be from the same people in these groups: child care leaders and leadership from Child Care Aware. Is there a way to think about diversifying who attends your planning meetings? Are there coaches and other leaders who are BIPOC that can be more present?
I will just say that this is something that I see our agency. I mean, I think it's like many things, it's a work in progress. And I think that we are continuing to really try to build this in a more intentional way. So when resources become available to us in a new way, or there's a new initiative, I think that there's, in a lot of ways, the agency is coming together to think about how are we being more centered in community? How are we taking If you're familiar with this approach, human-centered design, and putting that into practice, meaning looking at how communities lead, and help guide us in our work and how we do that kind of engagement. So I would just say I see from a lot of directions in the agency us continuing to do that. I don't think it's a perfect process. I can speak to the preschool development grant as an example. I spoke to it earlier that gave us the opportunity to do the needs assessment and the statewide coordination plan. We were able to do something a little bit different with that, not perfect, but to really be able to seed resources within communities rather than, us going to communities and driving conversations, being able to bring dollars and resources to communities to have conversations about this work. And again, it wasn't a perfect process. We're learning a lot from it, but I do see the intent for us moving in that direction and being more, I think, efficient with it too, because we also feel like as a state agency, we often talk about, we feel like we burn people out because we're asking the same questions time and time again. And so I think that there's also an effort to do some streamlining with that as well. And I'm sure other colleagues have something to add to that perhaps, but I just wanted to start with that.
Thanks, Kelly. I think, as Kelly noted, it's something we're trying to be really intentional in looking at. And I think the other thing we're really trying to think about here is where are the places that we're already interacting with groups of providers, and then who might be missing from that. So I'll just use the provider supports group as an example of this, and that was a combination of a couple of advisory groups. And I think, really trying to work through and think about how we're really intentionally bringing information forward in the planning process. And then I think the other thing that we have to be transparent about is when and if we've been directed to do something, and where we have room around what I like to call implementation considerations, so that we can be transparent when a decision has been made or we've been directed to do something. But how do we make sure that we're having conversations about what implementation should really look like with the right people?
Judy, I'm not sure if you're going to add something. I see you're unmuted, so I was going to check in before I moved on. Okay, you're good. Okay, thank you. I know we're getting short. It's all good. It's interpreting, right, the nonverbal cues, and now Zoom is its own nonverbal cue. So just trying to think about these last 15 minutes. I know there's some other suggestions here in the Q&A, and some I think Kelly and Nicole, you both began to speak to, and these suggestions, thinking again, supporting this idea of the ideas, the solid idea of kind of looking at those non-typical partnerships. How do we already engage and step into existing frameworks as a guest, as opposed to the leader? And I think sometimes coming from a government standpoint, we get duped with coming in with more, I don't know, I guess I want to say sometimes more unearned power sometimes in these discussions, when we really want to step in as a guest and be welcomed into the existing partnerships and be humble in terms of what we are looking at and what we can provide and learn from those communities. Couple more questions I want to see here. Casey, I see your question around tracking. Are we tracking if BIPOC children are being expelled at higher rates? We are, and yes, they are being expelled at higher rates. And also, are we tracking if CPS calls are made more on BIPOC families? And we are seeing that disproportionality at intake. We think about the calls that we get in from the community, we actually don't have that much control over, right? That's that broader involvement of everybody, but we do have control once those calls come in at intake, and who is being investigated by CPS, who is being removed from the home, how long are kids in care, and how many placements, and those are all available. And we are seeing disproportionality at all of those decision points as well. And that report's also available for folks on the website, and I can provide that link as well in the chat. I also see a question specifically around the Russian-speaking population. Russian-speaking population is not necessarily white. How are the Russian-speaking demographics collected and treated? There is a lack of Russian-speaking identity. I believe somebody had spoken earlier about the different languages that material is translated into. This is not quite that question, but I can't remember who responded, and if somebody wants to respond here to address that at all. It's a very specific question.
So I can respond from the perspective of just what we collect in Merit as far as the childcare workforce registry. But those items at this point in time are optional. Providers don't have to report that, but that is the mechanism for childcare and our and well, some of our other early learning workforce that's in Merit as well. That we are tracking some of those demographics, but I don't know if Vicki or others have something they would like to add there.
Oh, it looks like Vicki may have had to step
Vicki
out.
had to step away.
Oh, unless, yeah.
We're saying the same thing. Checking that. I also just want to make a note as we're wrapping up that I may not get us to all of the questions, but we are tracking and taking notes. And so we will be sure to answer in written form once we post the recording of this, that we'll answer, well, some written response to all the questions if I haven't gotten to them already. And I think, again, just trying to track both the chat and the Q&A. Looks like Cindy has a question of how is DCYF taking into account unique community data from assessments like the state NFP needs assessment to support implementation of equity strategies across the state and the unique needs of communities? I'll read that again. How is DCYF taking into account unique community data from assessments, such as the state NFP needs assessment, to support implementation of equity strategies across the state and the unique needs of communities?
I can try, Cindy. I'm not positive I fully understand the question, but as we have looked at risk indicators as well as signs of strengths and resiliency in communities, it's helped us look more carefully at what communities might be sort of in line for more services. And I think we are looking really carefully at not assuming that we make a decision at the state level about what is needed, but that communities really have the opportunity to develop their proposals for what they'd like to see. So we're experimenting with a federal grant, for instance, that is helping in some of our communities that have high rates of maltreatment, for them to do local community planning efforts to see what it looks like to better support families, because the answers to that may not be the service array or supports we already have in place. It may look different. And that kind of connects to a question that was that I answered earlier that said, well, what about peer networks, things that may not fall in like a traditional services or programs? And those are all things with an equity lens that we want to be listening to and paying attention to. So I think when you said maybe NFP needs assessment, you were referring to the home visiting needs assessment that was done that looked at some of the needs across some of our highest risk communities. So just sorting out what some of the solutions for meeting those needs are some of the things that we're really engaging community voice to help us think through.
Thank you so much, Judy. I appreciate that. Our almost last slide is simply, what else do you want us to know? But I also, Marites, you've had your hand up, and so I want to make sure to call on you so that you can ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. So kind of related to what somebody just said, but it was more comment on what somebody brought up earlier. The voices that need to be brought to the table at this meeting were the same voices that were at a previous meeting. There are some stakeholders who are not being invited to the table. I would encourage you all to expand an invitation to teachers who are on the front lines and can tell you about their experience firsthand and what they need to support the families. I would also encourage you to bring those families to the table. I'm sure that they have some needs that they need addressed that maybe haven't been addressed yet. And then a lot of people overlook this, but inviting the children, giving them a survey, sitting down with them and asking them, what do you need? What do you want? Because a lot of times we think we're helping families, but we might not be helping them in the way that they need. And also giving them a voice can empower them. And as a entity, Dcyf and the programs and the schools should, you know, give the families what they want, so they want what you have to give. And so taking that holistic approach and really embracing community voice. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. You were absolutely right that our children and our youth, but our children in this case, are so centralized to what we need to do and how we need to respond, and be able to listen and center their voices as well, because they're really the experts in their own lives, right? Even if they're little, and being able to help build community and supports around them. So much appreciated there. Okay, great. So sorry, I'm doing the double duty thing where I'm trying to look so gracefully into my camera while I'm checking all of the chat boxes that are next to me open. But we are getting close to time to wrap up. We want to just a couple more slides. You all have hung in there. Just over 100 of you are still with us here. So I want to thank you so much for sharing your time and your resources and your voice with us. Again, we will be doing some follow-up with you with the questions if we didn't respond to them. So many great suggestions came in through the Q&A and the chat. We are tracking them, and we will be posting much of what our notes and our written responses to many of these questions with the recording of this. So I'm going to hand it back to Yvette to wrap this up.
Wonderful, thank you. So I'm just gonna appreciate so much of your engagement and comments and questions. This has been, yeah, this has been a great time. So thank you everyone who's participated. And I'm just going to wrap up with a few next steps. As you can see, we're on January 13th, and if you can join us for the next webinar we have scheduled, it's focused on creating successful transitions for young people into adulthood, and that will be taking place on February 3rd. You know, I'll note we're continuing to meet with our existing advisory groups on all of these strategies, and with the goal of posting the final strategic plan in April. And we'll be, again, just to repeat what they shared, we'll be tracking all of your questions, the comments, and this will be brought back to our strategic leadership team for comment and consideration. And then we'll also be posting the Q&A on the DCYF strategic plan website, and we'll put that link in the chat. The only other piece I would say, if you didn't have a chance, or if you're like me and you're a processor, we also created a survey. If you would like to answer any of the questions or any other thoughts or comments you would like to share that way, we have that available, and we'll put that link in the chat. And I would just say, you know, if that also is not the way, or if you just want to reach out to us directly, Vicky Ibarra, I included her contact information. She's you know, leading our efforts around developing the strategic and racial equity plan along with our office, and you have our email address there. But yeah, thank you everyone again so much for your engagement. Thank you for our DCYF leaders who are present and everyone who shared. This has been beautiful, and we hope this has been helpful for you all. And again, we look forward to continuing to think about like implementing all of the ways that we're engaging community in a way that best meets your needs. And we appreciate you for joining us in this, just sharing where we are in this webinar today. Thank you. And on that note, we'll end unless anyone else on the panel has anything, any other closing thoughts or things you want to share before we close out. Beautiful. Thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your evenings. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.